100K to 450K per month. This is the recent results of a personal client of mine that we worked together to scale to 450K per month in the span of 3 months roughly. And I think this is going to be a very practical video for you so you can start implementing some of the stuff, which I think to me was fundamental, that I think a lot of business that I audit each week don't really have. So I think that'll be very, very practical for you. And by the way, if you want a more like customized audit and basically at identifying hidden revenue opportunities for your brand, or where you just, or where you kind of waste budget, click the link below in the description. I'm gonna personally audit the account for you. And then there's also a lot of free resources in the description so you can have a look. Some strategies that I use as a growth strategy. So that was obviously a span of period, maybe like less than 3 months actually. Now a big caveat obviously was during peak, which was Black Friday. So obviously a lot of that revenue, also having strategy down to hit that amount of revenue was super important, and capitalizing on that demand that obviously Black Friday naturally generates for a consumer. But again, you're probably gonna say, okay, it's just Black Friday results, right? Now the good thing is, now we are in December, right? So this is like actually, and it actually is like pacing higher than the Black Friday month. So again, there's a lot of fundamentals that went into play, and that's why I think this brand will do very well as a BAU. We didn't just focus on getting a proper strategy for Q4. It was also for like obviously getting all those evergreen fundamentals down so it can scale. Now, I have here 4 main pillars that we focused on, and I want to go on to each one and just go even more nuanced in terms of how I kind of structure things and how I thought of a strategy. Now, just for kind of context as well, obviously this is a product that is like an accessory brand. It's not like a purely fashion brand. It is like an accessory brand, so it had an actual selling point. It wasn't more so like brand identity. But the offer that was running, I think the brand was running in the UK for a couple of years basically, and I think the offer A has slightly been fatigued, quote unquote. Basically, a lot more competitors entering that market, and I think the brand owner just didn't have a clue in terms of like what exactly he needs to hit those targets. And so the first thing that we did, and I highly recommend going into it, is the unit economics and profitability. By the way, I have a kind of free calculator below that you can take when you sign up. So you can basically look your unit economics per product. So you can then go in and set targets on the ad account and on a blended perspective, so you make sure you're scaling profitably. Because if I was scaling, 2 to 3 times the size that we're previously in terms of top line, but we're doing this on like random numbers, like that would be a very big loss and very big mistake from my end. Because obviously we were scaling into a situation that wasn't profitable. So the first thing I did is just dive in deeper. Once I know those CAC targets, I obviously crafted a forecast for the remainder of 2025, but obviously for the next few months as well, which now we're kind of reforecasting based on the recent results. But the key thing here is the offer. So the offer was obviously pretty while a bit fatigued, pretty profitable. And when looking at the account, you will see the main problem was creative. So I wasn't like too concerned about changing the offer straight away, which or some businesses I think is also like very important. Just do some offer testing. So that wasn't one of the key things that I focused initially, just because was also Black Friday in the way. So I didn't want to just mess with too many variables and probably miss a big marketing moment. However, we did do a very kind of simple offer that didn't take a lot obviously from his end to set up, and it was pretty safe, which more so just to boost AOV through a bundle save. So you could get one case for 30. You get basically 2 cases for like 30%, and then we also did a 3 case I think for 50%, something like that. But basically bundle and save, this is a common tactic to increase AOV, obviously increase some of those margins as well, and make people just buy a lot more. So the average basket is, so in order to have a bit more CAC margin to scale spend and scale effectively, especially through Black Friday. That was a key offer that we unlocked. At the same time, or in conjunction with that existing offer, so we didn't like risk too much. But in procrastinate, so we just pivoted focus there. And in terms of like, first of all, the account structure, so that was the main things. Get down your unit economics, get down your offer. Again, I'll do a separate video for offer specifically, but obviously if your offer is like winning, I wouldn't change it. I would experiment though how I can unlock a more scalable and more profitable offer. Is that always something to test, especially as you scale. But if you take a look at this account, the main bottleneck was the creative. But before going into the creative, I'm gonna go into the account structure because there was also some fundamentals in a pretty much. I took over a very simplified structure. It wasn't like too much wrong happening compared to what I see usually. But I did consolidate it further. There was a CBO campaign with multiple ad sets. I did consolidate under one ad set. So bear in mind we are spending around maybe 1.5k a day when I come on, and now we are spending around 4.5k a day. So it's a big increase. So what I did is I basically consolidated the scaling campaign, testing campaign. It was a very little happening there because again, like I said, the creative was the biggest bottleneck. So I consolidated into one testing, one scaling campaign, and then for the international expansion, which is going to be a super key thing, the brand owner want to expand into the EU from UK. So there's a lot more complex that is being added both from a purely structural standpoint inside the ad account, but also from a business side perspective as well. But yeah, I added another campaign on top of those with just with just basically the international expansion. So stacking together probably like 6 to 8 countries, I'd say, in the EU region, the most scalable ones, the strongest ones, so we can see what's actually resonating the best, and we can then start to scale a bit more. And that was, I think, early October, so we had some data as we went into the actual Black Friday. Now, another key thing here that I did from a pixel and tracking perspective, which I think usually is like people just don't look at. Again, the guy was using triple well, so we were using triple well. So Sonar, I installed Sonar for maximum data. It's basically Sonar is like a server side tracking that triple well offers. So this is also recommended for my clients and everyone in terms of like getting the maximum data back to the pixel, and then advanced matching as well to again getting the max amount of data back to Meta. And I think there was also an issue with the duplicate events, which was a big concern initially when I jumped into it, but obviously working with the dev, that was quickly solved, which is good. But there was some issue in terms of like duplicate events from the pixel itself, which definitely had an impact in performance. So take a look at your pixel as well. You might find some quick wins there. Now that's from an account structure perspective. In a nutshell, what we did, we consolidated the account and we activated another campaign just for EU. Nothing else, no testing or scaling, just retesting some of those top performing ads in the UK into the EU, so we can then later down the line we can actually scale. Now from a creative perspective, now that was the most important thing. If you take a look at this account, and I highly encourage you to just go into your ad account at the moment and just click on the ads and see most of the ads were very similar, which to me, post Andromeda, signals the main bottleneck. Signals to me that we need a lot more diversity into the account. Both from a creative styles, like most were actually looking very similar. The usual statics and the usual UGC videos. The new personas, like I think that was one key area why we scaled so fast was key personas. We unlocked a couple new personas, which I think had a great impact apart from them increased creative volume and obviously getting a bit more diversity. We actually tapped into something that hasn't really been tapped into, something that hasn't really been explored yet, which was a kind of fashion style um, and fashion angle. Because again, bear in mind, this is like an accessory kit. It has, like I said, a unique selling point. It is actually like there is some utility. It actually solves a specific problem. It's not just an accessory, but for the demographic that also wanted the utility and the actual good looking, it was just an area that we just didn't focus. We had just focused so much pushing like the problem solution kind of format. We didn't really touch how this looks from other people, so they can easily just compare. So we did a lot of kind of compliments. We did a lot of basically live reactions in terms of like UGCs, but also a lot more high production videos showcasing a bit less tech response, you would say, bringing another, more diverse element into the account, just again more kind of identity and focusing on that kind of brand piece. So that was super, super important. And then iterative content. There was a few winners that we tried to kind of iterate on. Not with like insane success, but it definitely helped like refresh the concept. So something that I would recommend for you going into weekly. See how you can reskin those all top performers, especially now with like Andromeda. It's gonna be maybe harder, but make sure you have distinct 5 to 7 first seconds. So differently distinct openings, and not just openings, but like the start of the creative, maybe on the way up to like 5 to 7 seconds. And yeah, the other thing here was super important was the creative process. When I jumped into the account, they didn't have a clarity in terms of like how obviously they can iterate, what exactly they needed. So the first thing is obviously getting those fundamentals learnings from the past 12 months, start getting some iterations, and B, starting getting more diversity and unlocking those new persona tests that we did. Now, after having obviously that down, we gradually increased weekly volume to the place that obviously we had, enough concepts coming in so we can support testing and scaling. And that led into a data-led feedback loop process. We then, obviously, after a few weeks, we had some solid winners. We basically know what to do every week to get high quality new concepts into the account, and that really helped out in terms of helping with that scale, because without that we just wouldn't have that kind of scale even if we did those other fundamentals down, because the account really need creative frequency was actually keeping up as well. So again, something to take a look at. If you don't have a creative process down, make sure you have it. Again, what I recommend initially, just one weekly meeting with your creative person and your growth strategist or someone who's managing the account. Maybe it's you as like a business owner, but sit down, see what's worked, see what didn't work, see what hooks work, and just try to get some iterative concepts. So based on the winners, try to see if we can drive, let's say, a few different hook tests, but also recreating the same concept, maybe with like new kind of creators, or maybe just tapping into a new persona, for example. So that was it also from a creative perspective. In a nutshell here, there was a lot of stuff happening, but we brought a lot more diversity into the account through new persona testing and obviously new concepts. We also increased weekly volume, and we just put together a proper creative process in place. Last but not least is some of the other stuff was obviously so far it was just pretty BAU. We didn't do anything like very differently, but then comes international expansion and also preparing for Black Friday and Q5, which was kind of going through it. Now, the economics and kind of strategy was also very important, because I think a lot of people just try to kind of expand, but they don't take into account a lot of different economics that come into play when unlocking a new kind of market. Obviously, it's going to be different delivery. Obviously, it's going to be different, maybe, cost to actually deliver the product, like I said. But also, again, overall, just a completely different strategy. And I think it's people on the mind to see that it's going to be the most simple thing, the most easy thing to do, which, don't get me wrong, it's going to be one of the easiest and fast way to add scale to an account and scale your business horizontally, but it's also a lot more complex than I think people see, especially at scale. So what I've done initially is top countries to focus. Obviously, sat down with the founder. We did a bit of digging in terms of the economics. We identified, a few countries that actually made sense, and a few that had at least were kind of promising, so we can start testing. And then we again did dedicate campaign, and after a point, after a few weeks, we actually isolated into a separate testing environment, and that was key, because completely different creative strategy that goes into the UK, the US, and Germany, for example. Initially, it was more so like stack those countries, but we also isolated a few a bit spend behind. For example, Ireland, that was a great one, and Italy was a great one as well, which was a bit surprising, and then France. So those three campaigns were actually then going to dedicated environments to scale, and then we obviously tested stacked still into the testing environment, some of the new concepts that we were actually testing. So that obviously led into the EU scaling as hard as possible and scaling close to the UK, even if UK was the leading market so far. We basically doubled spend mainly through mainly through the creative of a company and the international expansion. And then obviously we gradually build from there. So again, very, very important things to mention in terms of the international expansion. And then Black Friday, again, we had a proper, it was pretty tricky initially, I won't lie to you, because we also needed to get the green business as usual assets, but also plan for Black Friday. So great turnaround from the founder and the creative agency that the guys were actually working with. But from an economic perspective, again, also something to pinpoint is not as easy as like just saying and just putting like a discount. It was a lot more thought than that. Like you said, with the bundles, that really helped us a lot. We just bumped a bit the discount, so I think it was buy to get 40% off, which again it still made sense from a margin perspective, and people were actually buying a lot more. Again, dedicated campaign for Black Friday, the dedicated creative also really helped scale. And we also did something that haven't done quite a lot. We also launched an early Black Friday offer just because looking at like previous years, this was done actually successfully with like much less content. So I kind of built on that winning concept. So we launched the early Black Friday, and then I think 5 days later we launched the actual Black Friday, and then now we transitioned into Christmas messaging and gift messaging. There's no specific offer, but it was mostly just holiday messaging into their own again separate campaigns. Now with that said, all of these factors led to scaling to 420, 412, and I think now over the last 90 days we're around 750K. I'll drop a screenshot here as well so we can see that. But again, just to summarize, make sure you have an optimized account structure, let as much data as possible to Meta, creative, more diversity the better, and a proper creative testing process and a weekly creative process. And then if you are expanding internationally, super key that you get your unit economics down, and obviously scaling on the top on those top countries or key targets. And then from Black Friday in Q5 or any other sales scenario, make sure you have dedicated campaigns, dedicated creative, and again, take a look at the economics and strategy there. In a nutshell, that was a video. I hope you really enjoyed it. Again, some of the stuff that I mentioned, you can have a look on the resources below. I think I go very in depth on some of those, so you can just copy paste for your own brand. Let me know how they go, and yeah, I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for tuning in. I'll see you in the next one. Thanks a lot.